So we're trying to create a skull in Illustrator, and you'll see here I have a template layer which I'm just using as a guide to remind me of what a skull looks like as I'm creating it using shapes and the tools in Illustrator. And I've created some separate shapes here. What I want to do now is try and get them looking a little bit more organic and more like the shape of this skull. And I'm going to use the blob brush tool to do that. Now if you want to follow along, we're in Blob Brush Skull Start AI, and you can find that in the Shapes folder. Now I have my Layers panel open here. If you don't have it showing, you can go to Window, Layers, or hit F7 to show it. And what I've done here is, if you're in the Essentials workspace, so if I reset Essentials and I click on the Layers panel, I can toggle it to appear and disappear, but I quite like, at this point, having it open. So I'm just going to drag it out. And that keeps it out here permanently. So I'm also going to open up the Artboards panel, and I'm going to dock that at the bottom of the Layers panel, because I've got two artboards on here. You'll see I've got this one here, where I'm going to create my skull. If I double click here, I can open up that artboard. And then I've got this one here, and this is just a practice for me to demonstrate the blob brush to you before we start drawing. So the blob brush tool is fantastic. Shift B is the keyboard shortcut for opening it up. And it's opened up a whole new way of working for me in Adobe Illustrator. Now, you'll notice if I click and drag, nothing's happening. You need to make sure you have the knife layer selected. So make sure to select the knife layer, which is the one we're going to draw on. And now when I move over here, you'll notice I get a little brush icon and my little circle indicating the size of my brush. Now you can use your mouse if you want to, but much easier if you use a Wacom tablet. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and you can use the left and right square bracket keys on the keyboard to make your brush bigger. Of course, you can double click on the brush and make changes to the brush in here. So if you don't want to use keyboard shortcuts, you can use this to adjust the size of the brush. And we're going to keep it as a fixed brush at the moment, and we're just going to paint to create a brush stroke. Now you'll notice that when I finish painting, instead of creating a path, it's actually creating a closed shape. And the great thing about it is, if I then continue to draw, it just extends that shape. Now, in order to see this happening, I can double click on the blob brush and I can ask it to keep selected when I'm drawing, so that when I draw, I keep seeing how my selection is growing. And that can be quite handy when you're using the blob brush tool. I can then maybe change to a smaller brush. Again, I'm just using my modifier to do that. And then we can start to do things like create these kind of protuberances from my main shape. So we can start to create maybe like a hairy caterpillar or something. Now at the moment, I'm not using pressure sensitivity, but if I go back into my brush settings, I can do things like say, okay, let's have the size controlled by the pressure of my pen. Or if you don't have a pen, you could say, let me have random sizes. And then you can decide your base size and decide a variation. So if you don't have a graphics tablet and pen, you can still get some variation in the stroke using the random setting. But if we choose pressure, I can use the pen pressure to say, okay, let's start with 13 points, but give it, let's say, 10-point variation. And this gives me an indication of the range of sizes that I'm going to be able to use. So I click OK. And now what I can do is press quite hard and then tail off and get softer. Now at the moment I tend to press quite hard on my pen. You can probably hear me doing it on my tablet in the recording. So it's very hard for me to get a variation of weight. So what I recommend doing is opening up the Wacom control panel. And if I open up the Wacom control panel, I can change how my pen feels. So I can go in here and I can say, make my tip feel a lot firmer. And now when I jump back to Illustrator, you'll notice if I press hard, I get a heavier line, and if I press softly, I get a lighter line. So now I can use that to create more variety of line here. So I can start to create these lines that are gradually getting fatter as they get towards the body. Okay, so you get the idea of how it works. Now, if I was to change colour, and when you select a colour from the colour panel, you'll notice that it changes my stroke value. Now, if I have the shape selected and I do that, it's going to put a red stroke on. So we're just going to undo that and deselect and then choose a red colour. Now, you'll notice that the blob brush, if I draw with it, actually uses the stroke colour to create the line. So if I'm now to paint on the black, because I've chosen a new colour, it's not going to combine it with the existing shape. And again, I'm using my pressure sensitivity there to create these interesting shapes. Let's add a little bit more of that. So we'll start off with a bigger brush and add a little bit more variation. So I can start to do really light lines and then great big fat lines at the end. Now you'll notice it's not joining them together, but if I was to click and drag over the shapes, we now create one single shape. So because it's a red colour, it's all the same colour, we create the same shapes. Now even if I was to change the colour very, very slightly, so if we change it to a very slight different colour of red, you'll notice it creates a completely new shape. Okay, so incredibly clever tool. If I'm to select black again and paint, it creates a new shape again, and that's because I'm actually painting on top of the red. If I was to just click over here and start painting, it's going to add it to this existing shape. So it's kind of intelligent. It knows if I click on something in the background to continue the existing shape with the same colour, but if I paint over here, it's going to create a new black shape so that it can place it on top of the red. Okay, so a little bit of a mess I've created there, so I'm just going to delete that and show you another couple of tricks with the blob brush tool. What you can do is make your brush really, 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 really big, which it can take a bit of time using that, so I'm just going to go in here and choose my size settings to make a really big brush. And I'm going to take pressure off. I went, whoa, that's a little bit too big, so let's make it a little bit smaller. So we'll maybe change it to about 500 points. Okay, that again is too big, so let's bring it down to about 200. Okay, so you can do things like make clouds. Okay, so if I want to make a cloud shape, I can create my basic shape just by clicking and creating a rough cloud shape. Then I could maybe make my brush a little bit smaller and create a few extra little bumps on the edge of the cloud of different shapes. So for creating things like clouds, the blob brush tool is fantastic. You can also do things like, again, I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. You can use it with the shift tool to create straight lines. So we could do something like maybe hold down the shift key and click and drag to create one straight line, click and drag to create another straight line, and then click some vertical lines as well. So we can create these kind of fence type structures. And you can also do diagonals as well. So if we click to create some diagonals, we can create that kind of shape as well. So the nice thing about the blob brush is it creates a compound shape. It's as if I've created lots of shapes and then joined them together using the shape builder or the Pathfinder tool. So that's a little bit about the blob brush tool. I want you to experiment with it, and in the next movie we'll move on to this artboard here where we can use the blob brush tool on a real world project.